Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I am Nathan Baird from the Indianapolis Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
I like how it's like we're taking attendance. We need to have a little bit more life to start things off. We are past the halfway point of preseason camp. And first of all, I'm glad that we're here on video because finally the aspect ratio has normalized a little bit. If you watch our videos that we post after camp, I'm always standing in the forefront and Sam's always in the back. And it looks like I'm like this Easter Island statue and you're a normal sized person next to me. And I'm glad that we get to normalize things a little bit here. For those of you watching on YouTube.
There's a slight height difference. So for us to be on level, with the tops of our heads kind of on level playing field there, I usually take a step or two back. And because of that, especially on the screenshots, it does look like you were just, taking up a majority of the camera with your head.
Yeah, the last job that I had when we would do those sorts of videos, one of my coworkers was well over 6 feet, and the other two of us were well under 6 feet, and it was always a really goofy thing to try to get all of us in the frame together. So at least we're a little bit closer than that, but still, it's led to some goofy looks here in camp, but that's all right. So now that we've crossed into the second half of preseason camp, we're getting into the back end of camp towards that August 31st opener against Indiana State. We thought we should take a look at the starting lineup, and we're going to project it based on what it would be if everyone was healthy and available to play on opening day. And then that will allow us to have then a broader conversation about just how much injuries are affecting this team right now or could be affecting this team still when we get to opening day. But just in general, Sam, did you come into preseason camp with a lot of questions as to how this lineup was going to look, and has that mostly been answered for you over these first couple weeks?
I think the offensive line was at least three spots were known. Receiver was the one that I really, outside of one player, had no idea. We've gotten some clarity, but not really on those positions, especially because one of the projected starters is not out at practice right now. So that was kind of on offense anyway. Defense was a whole different animal with guys moving to different positions and just the dynamic of this defense, how it's kind of set up to succeed with, pressure on the quarterback and with a safety playing basically punt return spots. But yeah, for the most part, I think I had a good idea at roughly half the positions on each side of the ball. And now maybe a little bit better idea outside of a spot or two.
So Sam and I haven't really compared notes here. We've been watching practice, obviously communicating, but also we watch it through our own perspectives and take our own notes. And it'll be interesting to see if we match up on everything here as far as how we think this is going to look on opening day. But let's start on offense. And because I think that was where things were maybe a little bit more straightforward, except for, as you said, with the possible exception of receiver. But no question as to starting quarterback right now, Hudson Card. We're going to focus on starters. This is maybe the one position where I thought we should extend the conversation beyond that. Did you think coming into preseason camp that there could be a real competition at backup linebacker or I'm sorry, backup quarterback? Or did you think that was going to be Ryan Brown's job for sure on opening day?
I think there still isn't a competition, but because Hudson Card is so far and away the number one guy, and Marcos Davila is a true freshman, right, you have that redshirt option with him, just such as Ryan Brown redshirted last year. That I think because of that, Ryan Brown is the guy, maybe more so, he can do some good things. He's got the experience now, having been at Purdue last year, but that redshirt option, I think, makes it easier to make Ryan Brown the backup guy because you don't want to waste a redshirt year with Davila if you don't have to.
The redshirt thing is interesting because in this day and age, if I was a coach, I would probably care less about that. And I would care less about it in some ways, the more upside that I think a guy has, because if you're what are you actually protecting with the red shirt do you just end up giving him another year to go play somewhere else? I'm not talking about
Right.
Marcus Davila here. I'm just talking about player in general, player X. Um, it's an interesting discussion, and if you're also the best quarterbacks in college football, also don't always expect to spend 5 years in college. Now, maybe Marcus Davila is already thinking about a timeline like that. Like maybe he came into college thinking this is going to be a 4 or 5 year experience for me. But a lot of places that isn't true. I do think that I think you're right. If Hudson Card plays every snap, if Hudson Card starts every game, then I think it's most likely that Davila ends up with a red shirt this year, especially because if there were to be a postseason game, that's like an additional game I think that you get on top of things. You don't have I think you can play 4-1, at least that's the
Mhm.
way it is in some other situations. So that would give them some flexibility there because there's no reason to burn his red shirt just going in and handing the ball off late in games or playing the clock out. And you would want to get Brian Brown that experience. If something were to happen to Hudson Card and there were an extended absence, I think then there would have to be a conversation about who is the best quarterback at this moment. From what we've seen, I'm pretty sure it's Ryan Brown on day one. But when you're talking about a true freshman, you could also be talking about someone who's getting exponentially better. And if this were to be a second half of the year conversation, and especially depending on where Purdue's season is at that point, that could change the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think Brown is the better player right now. You're right. He can do some more things. He's versatile. We saw him run quite a bit when he played at Northwestern last year, and that opens up thing. He's more like Hudson Card in the way that he can run the offense, I think. And Davila is going to be a drop back passer with a big rocket arm and try to pick you apart that way. And because of that, I think it makes the most sense that Ryan Brown is the backup. Where especially for the offensive line, I talked to Marcus Bowe a few weeks ago, and he said you do want to block a little bit longer when you know you have a running quarterback because you never know when things break down and he just takes off. So it probably makes the transition a little bit easier if you do have to go from one quarterback to the other. I would like to see, possibly in this Indiana State game, you get both of those quarterbacks in if it's, 56-14 in the fourth quarter, and just even if it's one drive or two drives, let them kind of go out there and play and get their feet wet and see what they can do as quarterbacks in a game like setting.
And you do have 4 games to play with to keep that red shirt, like I said, but you never know when those 4 opportunities are going to come. And if it's your third string guy, maybe sometimes, like you say, you do pull the trigger earlier. So maybe we'll get to see him early. But for Purdue's sake, you hope that they don't probably have to talk about Marcus Davila too much in 2024 because it would mean that he's being pushed into uh, um, playing time as opposed to maybe just naturally ascending there. Running back, I asked after practice on the days are kind of running together for me. Was that Tuesday? Asked Lamar Connard about is there a battle for who takes the first snap? Because he says, well, I'm gonna, I think we have 2 starters. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. So then does that mean that there's a competition right now? And by competition, I kind of meant like, hey, as a coach, do you sort of use this as like a little extra motivator for Devin Mockabee and Reggie Love to decide, who gets that first snap? Or does Mockabee get it because of his tenure and what he's done and what he's earned? And he said, yeah, like Devin Maccabee's the guy who will get that first
Mhm.
snap. So that wasn't a shock at all, but it is clearly a position that just like last year with Tyrone Tracy, they're looking at this as like a 1A, 1B situation. And then even if Mockabee is a little bit more the face of the franchise because he's been here as long as he's been here and has done the things he's done and gotten some notoriety, that this is still a job share in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of crazy to think now that it's been 2 years, but Devin Mockabee was kind of an instant fan favorite because he had a big run against Indiana State in the season opener a couple of years ago. And then injuries just piled up, and he, as a walk on freshman, became the guy and went out and every single week was just doing something crazy. Put up great numbers against a lot of tough defenses. and because of that, like you said, became the face of the franchise. But last year, you had to find a second running back to complement him, and Tyrone Tracy had been playing receiver at Iowa, and then while Jeff Brown was Purdue's head coach, and naturally, as a high school player, was a running back that had, I think, 2,000 yards rushing in a season at the Decatur Central. And he said, I kind of would like to go back to that, and saw that as the best way for him to get to the NFL, which he ended up being right. Purdue ended up being right, taking a chance. Lamar Conrad had known him through recruiting his brother to Illinois State. So there was already that kind of dynamic where it's like, hey, I'm familiar with you. We know each other type thing. And now you bring in Reggie Love, who's in a similar situation. He, doesn't know the running backs coach, but he knows Ryan Walters. He knows all these guys who came to Purdue from Illinois. And that was probably the connection there. When his name entered the portal, it's like, hey, we know this guy. We've seen him. We know what he can do. Bring him over. He's probably the best fit to come in and kind of offset what Purdue lost with Tyrone Tracy. As far as I know, we're talking about depth chart and who's the starter. And it's been clear that Devin Maccabee is going to be kind of the first name on the depth chart. But this is very, very much definitely two guys playing a lot with the offense, and one's going to be listed as a starter and one's going to be listed as a backup. But it's not really that way at all. I don't think Tyrone Tracy last year took it as a slap in the face that he wasn't the number one guy listed on the depth chart, because he's still, got his carries, got balls thrown to him out of the backfield, was a big part of the return game as well. So these two will have a share load, and who gets more carries or more looks is probably going to depend on the week. So it could be, Devin Maccabee gets 20 carries one week, and the next week Reggie Love gets 20 carries and Maccabee gets 10.
Yeah, I did ask Conrad also that when you're vetting these guys, vetting's maybe not the right word, you're recruiting these guys, you're going through a process out of the portal in a short amount of time to figure out that, this isn't like a video game where you're just like plucking the guy with the highest rating or whatever. There things like fit and personality and their motivations, all those things come into this. What they expect is part of this. Would Reggie Love, was he looking for a place where he can go run the ball 300 times, or is he looking for a place where he can help a program at the level of Purdue win, instead of maybe going to a smaller place where he would be the man? And Conrad said that it helped that Love had been in this situation before where he was essentially the number two guy and had sort of thrived. Even though he has number one talent, they believe that he knows about sharing this job. So it sounds like everything is good from a mindset standpoint, and now it's just a matter of doing it on the field. Talk about the last position that is a certainty. Max Clare is locked in as the number one tight end. How big of a deal is it right now, though, that George Burren has not been able to play, has not been able to practice much? We didn't get a specific update from Ryan Walters on him, but we went from a thing where, first week of camp, it's being talked about like his development could give them that second tight end that opens up a lot of interesting things in the offense. And if he can't go, that I don't know if they're going to have that option available to them at the start of the season, to the extent that they were maybe hoped.
Yeah, and we're kind of glancing over the fact that Max Clare just 2 days ago was wearing a red non-contact jersey.
Yeah,
and
I was going to bring that up again in a minute when we get to the end of this list, because it's going to be, but go ahead.
Yeah, Max Clare is a guy who wasn't even supposed to be the number one tight end last year, and because of an injury, he was the number one tight end, and then he went out and, much like Devin Maccabee 2 years ago, he was putting up big numbers every single game, and it's all of a sudden like we may have stumbled onto a starter here by accident, and then because of that, he does get hurt early last season, 4 or 5 games into the season, but looked pretty healthy in the spring. You're right, the number one unquestioned tight end, and then you throw in what George Burren did against Indiana, and I think Drew Bibber scored a touchdown against Indiana. Those guys were filling in for injury in that Indiana game, and all of a sudden it looks like tight end is a strength. Purdue's got quite a bit coming back in that regard, and you have guys who have played in some big games, and Drew Bibber also a couple of years ago during the bowl game against LSU, because so many guys had left or opted out or whatever, and there was a coaching change, he basically got a month there of working as the number one tight end for a time. So I do think Max Clare is the obvious guy, but it hurts if George Burren can't go. Nothing against Drew Bibber. George Burren is 6'5". He was a state champion in track. He's just kind of a freak, rare athlete that can do a lot of different things. And if you can, even if you line them up together on the field, Clare and Burren, that's mismatch nightmare for probably any defense. Or if you're just alternating them in. It's going to be definitely interesting if Burren can't go. I think Drew Bibber is probably the guy that would get those second team reps, but Max Clare, as long as he's healthy, is going to be the guy. And you hope you see the Max Clare that was playing, against Virginia Tech last year and Syracuse and some of these early games where he was catching a lot of balls and getting some yards.
It's in the idea of being able to put a second tight end that defenses respect is not about that. Playing that second tight end is not always about getting a jumbo package because you're going to run the ball or because you're trying to do something in a short yardage situation. It's to force the defense to change its personnel, and then you can still attack vertically. You can still find a mismatch in the defense playing off of those tight ends and still get a big play. So that's what is available to them if they get the right combination of guys. Maybe we'll have a better indication at the end of camp. But obviously, getting Max Clare back was after a couple days off was pretty crucial, and having him healthy for opening day is the big deal. Okay, so the two places where we were less certain, I guess we'll start with offensive line, because I actually think maybe this isn't as complicated as we thought. It's a little bit complicated right now, again, because of injuries. But if all things were equal, if everyone was completely healthy, do you think that the starting lineup on opening day would be Corey Stewart at left tackle, Jalen Grant at left guard, Gus Hartwig at center, DJ Wingfield at right guard, and Marcus Bowe at right tackle?
I think Musa would be playing left guard.
Okay.
Corey Stewart would be the left tackle. I had Musa, Hartwig, Jalen Grant, and Marcus Bowe. And a lot of that is because Grant, Bowe, Musa, and Hartwig started together last year. And then it was just, started together last year until all kinds of crap hit the fan on the offensive line. But those guys, the continuity of them playing together, and, they're all kind of versatile guys. Jalen Grant can play center and had played center. Marcus Bowe was, probably going to be a first or second team all-conference guy last season until he got hurt at Iowa. And still, I believe, was on the honorable mention team with, several games missed. So he's definitely I think the leader of the group outside of Hartwig, who's just, a natural, obvious leader, being the center and then being as experienced as he is. But Moose is that one that I think we probably disagree on a little bit. Wingfield is I believe, a grad transfer. I know he's from New Mexico. Yeah. But, it's nice to have that flexibility where you have that guy that can play guard, can play tackle, because the offensive line that starts, even if Stewart comes back and plays against Indiana State, that starts on August 31st, I guarantee you will not be the offensive line that starts against Indiana in the last regular season game.
Yeah, almost certainly. Wingfield, I think, is interesting to me right now because he was in with the ones before Stewart got hurt, at least some of the time, early in camp. He was getting some of those right guard reps along with Musa. And then since Stewart got hurt, you took Wingfield and moved him to left tackle. And I don't think you're moving an extra guy necessarily to left tackle, especially if that guy is going to be in there to start the season. So I think either one of us could still be right. I think that position might still be up in the air somewhat. But it gets to something we've been talking about throughout camp, which is this situation. I'm not going to say it's a positive situation, but the silver lining with Stewart being hurt is it's allowed them to work on that depth even more, and maybe confirm the quality of the depth that they're getting from guys like Musa, from guys like Wingfield that maybe can do a couple of things. I don't think that is going to that isn't a net positive if Corey Stewart isn't ready to start the season and if this injury interrupts his preparation and development, and he doesn't have the season he should have, that would be the better outcome if he had just never gotten hurt. So that's what I'm saying. It's more of like a silver lining that you can sort of squint and see. But at this stage of camp, I think it's still fair to look at it like that. They talked like Stewart will be back for opening day. We'll see. He still has not been back at practice 2 more days after Ryan Walters told us that.
Yeah, and last year, because of how I guess the offensive line was changed almost every week out of necessity because of injuries. Marcus Johnson, the O-line coach, who we haven't talked to yet during camp, at least not as a group setting scrum as we have with the other positions. He said, "I'm going to play the best 5 linemen, and I don't care if your position is center, guard, tackle. If you're one of our best 5 linemen, you're going to line up out there at one of those 5 spots." And last year, the best 5 linemen, quite honestly, were not playing, but it was just a matter of we're trying to find 5 linemen. And now you've got a lot of depth at that position, presumably, a lot of players at that position anyway, where you are trying to develop competition at spots. And we've seen with the second unit, even some of these guys who are playing with first team reps are just moving to another position with the second team and kind of playing a different spot with that unit. So it will be definitely interesting because offensive line also has been, at least last year, something where you don't play a whole game at some of these spots. You get 2 series and then another guy goes in and plays your spot for a series and gives you a breather. And the idea is that when you get to the fourth quarter, you're still pretty fresh, where the other team's defensive line is hopefully wearing down, and you can impose your will on them a little bit.
So which brings us to receiver. 3 receiver spots, and I think you're right. Like, we didn't exactly know what to expect, and injuries have clouded this. The 3 that I have, if injuries were not an issue, and you were just basing it on, and a lot of times I kind of go back to what I saw early in camp before the injuries happened and how they were lining up then and what would maybe make the most sense. So I have, and on the outside, I don't know if we care that much about Z or X, but I have Jaden Dixon-Veal and Jamal Edrin on the outside and CJ Smith at slot. Is that how you think it would be if injuries weren't a thing, which, by the way, they are a thing right now for 2/3 of those guys?
Those are the 3 players who I had listed. Clearly, Smith has not been practicing and is not going to play against Indiana State. If the situation was reversed and Notre Dame was that first game, I think he would be playing probably, or at least trying to play. And Jaden Dixon-Veal hasn't been at practice either, and we don't really have any idea. We haven't been told it's serious or he's out for an extended period of time, or even when Ryan Walters was telling us this guy's going to miss the season opener, this guy's going to miss the season opener, he didn't say that in regards to Jaden Dixon-Veal. So Edrin is the guy. He probably would have been the guy or the number 2 guy last year in terms of catches, receiving yards, all of that stuff. And he's been, he was the one who was hurt last year. Now he's the one who's healthy and clearly the kind of the alpha of that group. But all we heard in the spring, early in this fall, was CJ Smith has burner speed, elite speed that, he can take the top off of any defense. So because of that, if he's healthy, I think he's going to play because he gives you something where Edrin's not slow, but he's a big dude, big bodied receiver. And you want that mix of kind of the slot guy and then the guys that can take the top off the defense and just give a different mix. And then we go back to talking about the tight ends and what they can add. I think there's a lot of weapons there. Shamar Rigby is a guy I know you wrote about. He's been getting some first team reps. Andrew Sawinski is kind of that Swiss Army knife that you can plug in anywhere. But if we're talking about specifically putting your best 11 on the field to start a season, those are guys who are probably going to run off the sidelines in certain, looks or just to give a guy a breather, whatever it might be. And then, I think Ahmad Branch was getting some first team reps yesterday. But again, just the guy that you want him to be ready in case those situations come up where you have to use him. And we had talked a little bit with Corey Patterson about Leland Smith, and he said Leland Smith better give us something. But at the same time, that's 6-7 receivers we're talking about now. Not all of those guys are going to be guys that are catching a pass every week, but they may be guys who are used in some capacity, whether that's on kickoff team or something like that. But if we're talking about just strictly who are the best 3 receivers who are going to play a majority of the snaps, I think it's Dixon Veal, Smith, and Jamal Edrin.
I think that's how the season starts. I'm curious to see, because some of these other guys we're talking about are younger guys, and I think you sometimes early in the season you defer to veterans until the younger guys may have a little bit more of um, a proving ground that they have to go through to like show you that they deserve the snaps. But then sometimes once they do, then that becomes their job. So I'm definitely open to that being an evolving thing over the course of the season. Now, like we said, Dixon Veal's out of practice right now. CJ Smith is one where Ryan Walters has already said probably not playing in the season opener, probably holding him out and not getting him back until that Notre Dame game. But I think that is what's interesting right now. What should maybe be a good sign is that when you see someone like Shamar Rigby having to play number 1 reps at this point of camp because of injury, that's why he's playing number 1 reps right now, is because of the injuries. But the way they're talking about him is not like, well, somebody had to take the 1 reps. It's like, oh no, he's like making plays in practice, and he handles himself like an older guy, and he's carrying himself in out off the field like he's an older guy and taking care of his business. And I think that's a positive sign that helps you think that even when this unit is fully healthy, that when you're going to the second unit to get and bringing him in or somebody else in to get those starters out of the game for just 1 series even or whatever, that there isn't a huge drop off, that you can still expect production from him even if he's a true freshman.
Yeah.
So
one guy, I'm sorry. One guy we didn't mention was Dron Tibbs, who I've been impressed with, quite honestly. But he might be that 4th guy in this whole mix.
Yeah, and sometimes that's where it kind of becomes, the coaching decisions really come in. Like sometimes you have like 3 frontline guys, and those guys are going to play a lot, and they get the bulk of the snaps, and it's just a quick thing that maybe you wrinkle some guys in here or there. Other times though, it develops into more of a real rotation, and you might go 5 or 6 deep, and a lot guys are playing a lot, even if it's not a fully balanced snap rotation. It's the breakup isn't that far one way or the other, and everybody's getting some reps. And I don't know yet which of those things Purdue is going to have in 2024. And I don't know that we will know until a few weeks into this season, a few games into the season, because there are guys that just aren't playing right now. That is allowing some other guys to show off a little bit and show up and prove what they can do. But as far as like, bringing it down and like maybe focusing on a few guys, I don't know if Purdue just has the data to do that, and may not have it until at least through the Notre Dame game, and maybe even more so through, Oregon State and Nebraska getting in towards the middle of the year. But I wanted to bring up that, so of those guys that we mentioned, that kind of concludes the offense. But Dixon Veal, Smith, Claire, and Stewart have all been out. So a third of your starting lineup right now is either isn't practicing or has missed practice. Claire missed, it was either 1 or 2 full practices, and then had the red pullover on for another practice. So it's a not insignificant chunk of the spring or the preseason camp that he's missed. And Purdue is talking about this without much concern, that they feel like this is, all things considered, they haven't lost anybody for the season yet. We've seen other teams. Indiana just lost an offensive lineman that it was expecting to do big things, is already out for the season. We're seeing at other, I think maybe Nebraska lost its starting left tackle already for the season. Like there's been other significant injuries in the Big Ten, teams that Purdue's going to play, and they're not in that situation yet with significant guys. But I also think you want to build a certain momentum out of preseason camp, and this offense isn't necessarily getting to do that just because of crucial guys being out.
Yeah. Part of this is, I think, because last year just was so injury riddled that you're just thankful.
Yeah, comparatively,
the guy, he's going to be out 3 weeks, so that's nothing.
Right.
Many of our guys were just done for the year. That's They were pulling up guys who had no, probably even in their own minds, no goals of being on the field a significant amount of minutes. I remember talking to a guy who was starting on offensive line against Ohio State last year, and he's like, beyond my wildest imagination, I just wanted to come here and be a part of this. And now I'm starting against probably the best team or second best team on the schedule. So when you take last year and you take this year, I think you will definitely take guys getting a foot stepped on and missing a few weeks, or a guy who has to sit out for a portion of practice. Now, there are some guys who we know are not going to play this season. One of them being Rod Green, I think was mentioned earlier this week, but that was not a guy that was slated to be in the rotation or a starter or anything like that. So that's why we're not, probably mentioning things like that. The one that's interesting that, like you said, we still don't know about is George Burhan. And if he can come back, that's great. Probably something we'll get more clarity on Monday. I believe is when we talk to Ryan Walters next, Monday or Tuesday and kind of get some injury updates.
Yeah, and we're going kind of long here on the offense, but like the thing about Burhan is, and we had the conversation, yes, I think it's, if you can have two really good tight ends, it gives you some flexibility and allows you to maybe force the defense to do some things that you want to do. At the same time, when this offense is fully healthy, to put Burhan on the field, you have to take off either Jaden Dixon-Veal, Jamal Edrin, or CJ Smith. And even if Smith is someone you can move to the outside and take one of those other two places, you are still taking off a more dynamic player sometimes to put a tight end on. So if it's again, in a goal line situation, you do that often. If it's in an open field situation, then there's a math that gets involved in that. And that's why it's important that second guy has developed to a level where you can really trust him as a receiver to then make the defenses respect that too. So I am curious how that looks when Purdue finally has the chance to do it. Defensive side of the ball, like you said, some guys moving around, but also a side of the ball where even when they had new guys coming in via transfer, it I think became pretty apparent early on who was starter quality and who was going to be starting for this defense. I am curious how you see the defensive line. So the way we broke this up, the three defensive tackle, however you want to call it, spots, the Buck and Fox outside linebackers that are essentially rush ins. Then we'll do Mike linebacker. We'll do the hybrid position, which will either be like a will linebacker or the safety linebacker combo. And then three corners and free safety. And free safety is like, I guess we'll do it last, but it's like the least dramatic thing in college football this season.
Yeah. I don't think there's any debate on two
positions. Yeah, and Mike linebacker. Yeah. But let's start on the defensive line because I'm going to maybe defer to you here. We've seen a lot of guys playing. Like I've tried to chart the number one snaps all along, and I guess there's a lean as to who's been there the most. But we've seen a lot of guys there, and that's not uncommon. You typically do have a rotation that goes 5 deep or so at defensive tackle if you can get away with it. But I guess how would you expect it to line up on opening day right now?
One of the guys, and I don't know if this is somebody you have, especially if you're charting this every day, who I think is starter quality is DeMarge Lewis. Now, DeMarge Lewis' problem is he's been healthy less than he's probably, or more than he's been injured more than he's been not injured. So, yeah, he was back, I believe, yesterday working with the first team. But a lot of this camp, we've also seen him just standing there in a jersey without pads, kind of watching and off to the side. But he's a guy with experience, been around for a while at two different schools. He's in the mix anyway, if he's healthy. The one guy who's intriguing to me is a guy who I've known since he was like 14, 15 years old, is Moa Monade. He's only 6 feet tall. He's super strong, super athletic, quick, wrestled for about 3 weeks in high school and was in the heavyweight championship state finals match, just off pure athleticism without really having a base of how to wrestle. So he's definitely a freak, but he was 6 feet tall. So a lot of those major programs came and, film and everything said, this guy's great. And then you see his height, and then you don't recruit him because of measurables. And to Mark Hagan's credits, who was at Purdue at the time, is now at Louisville, said, hey, we can use this guy. And now it looks like he's he's somebody who has a chance to play significant role on this defensive line. So I have those two, and then I have Jeffrey Mba, not Mbop, the Hanson song, just Mba. He would be the third guy I have there, and he's a guy who played a little bit last year. I believe he had a touchdown on a fumble last season. So those three would be, as of now, and mind you, we're not the guys who make these decisions. We're just trying to tell you what we see and what we project would be my three guys on the defensive line.
So yeah, Omonade and Lewis were both in there yesterday with the ones from what I wrote down, along with Umba. So that was the three. If you're going by the most recent thing we saw, that makes sense. We've also seen players like Joe Strickland and Cole Brebert in there.
Cole played a lot last year and was from Penn State, and I anticipate, he's definitely, I think he and DeMarge Lewis maybe swap out a little bit or whatever, but he's definitely a wrecking machine, and I think he's starter quality, and probably proves me wrong, and becomes that starter.
Yeah, and again, when you can go 4 or 5 deep, it's just it's so beneficial. You when the offense is going and an offense is getting a lot of first downs and you can get worn down. That's kind of the whole point of it. You can really get some momentum going as an offense, and the defense can't sub out if you can keep going, especially, that's the modern approach with the tempo. And to have 5 guys who, when you do get an interruption, you can sub somebody else in and get somebody fresh to go in against that offensive line. Or, if you're just swapping out series, it's just so beneficial to have quality depth at those interior defensive line spots. Omonode is interesting to me. Like you said, I think I've seen some good moments from him in camp. And yeah, he's maybe 6 foot. It seems undersized, but there's also a history of plenty of defensive linemen out there who are a little bit shorter, not to me, as we talked about at the start of this podcast, but 6 foot. But if you know how to use your leverage, that can become an asset. And with his wrestling background, I think that kind of play into that too. So I think he's an intriguing guy. If he can, this can be the year where he kind of puts it all together and makes that move. But it's nobody, I think, looks at the interior defensive line as the area of this team that has to carry this defense. But I think it can be a sort of foundational piece that a lot of these other positions sort of attack off of. In combination with that, we should talk about the rush ends. And I have Will Helt down as the Buck and CJ Madden down as the Fox. I think I have those positions correct, the way that they've been talked about. I am a newcomer to all of this parlance. But so those are the two that I put down. I will say, I feel like this week, Sheeta Silla has made kind of a push maybe to be in the mix to start opposite. It looked like Madden for sure early in camp. Then Madden gets hurt and Silla starts getting more 1 reps. And we've been hearing good things about Silla. Like they're talking about how he can help this team, his athleticism. He certainly looks the part when you stand next to him. And it's probably the answer is going to be, I think, some combination of those 3 is the 3 main guys. And honestly, we're probably talking about Helt on one side and the other 2 guys on the other side, maybe in some kind of combination. But that seems to be the triumvirate that it's coalescing around. I just don't know for the very first snap. I think I would still say Madden. I think he still is the higher upside guy, but we can't. I have noticed Sheeta Silla making a move this week.
Yeah, and Madden obviously was out for not an extended period of time, but like a week there where he was. Yeah, he was either not participating in drills or was a non-contact guy going through drills.
But we should say was at practice every day. So yes. even when he wasn't practicing, he was and wasn't in pads. He was there going through, doing like mental reps, like doing walkthrough reps through the drills. So he was always there and was pretty quickly back in full pads.
I went back and looked at what I wrote after the spring game, and it's funny because one of the things that really impressed me about that, and sometimes you forget about this as you go through a summer and everything else, I mentioned that those 3 guys and Jaire Ojada all kind of stood out to me, and part of that is because of this defense and what those players, those positions are allowed to do. But Will Helt was, I mean, he was the star defensively of the spring game, probably. And then CJ Madden, you mentioned, has higher upside. He's got a lot more years ahead of him. So if Purdue, wants to keep him here for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, maybe you kind of put that into play a little bit. Like, we need this guy for the future as well. Sheeta Silla played at Boston College, played quite a bit. So he's got the experience. So it's going to be, you're right. I think Madden is, maybe because of his body structure and what he can do, he's probably the better option for the most reps, but both these guys are going to probably split time, I would think. It's just going to be a matter of which one is out there the percent of the 60-40 load, whatever it might be. And I think that I put down CJ Madden, but you're right. Sheeta Silla, it would not surprise me if he ends up being the guy instead.
Yeah, and Silla, to me, like Boston College, it's not like they were blowing up the world there out on the East Coast, but it's a solid program. And the guy who was the head coach there was a guy named Jeff Hafley. He had been the defensive coordinator at Ohio State, Ryan Day's first year, and then took the Boston College job, had been a defensive coach in the NFL before that. And he left Boston College to go be the, I believe, defensive coordinator for the Packers. So the one thing you could say about Boston College is they know defensive players. They know about developing defensive players. And the guys, the program is sort of built around a guy who knows defense. So I think that he has a very strong background, and I think he's starting to, now that he's becoming, I guess, more comfortable within this defense and what he's asked to do in this defense, which is probably not exactly what he was asked to do at Boston College, but finding ways to sort of utilize him in this new format, I think you're starting to see that come to the forefront. Obviously, KJ Jenkins, whatever you want to call him, is going to be the Mike linebacker, is probably rarely, if ever, going to leave the field. Working on a piece about him. I was just talking to his high school soccer coach yesterday. I don't know if people know that he was.
I didn't know he played high school soccer.
He was a star soccer player in high school, believe it or not. What position do you think he played?
I'm not going to say goalie. I would say like a center back type that just wipes people out.
He was an all-state goalkeeper. So that'll be in that story when I finally publish it at IndyStar.com, JCOnline.com. But big things expected from him. And obviously a transition for him to go from the edge to Mike linebacker. But people like where that's headed, and it makes sense for him, for his future. He's a little bit shorter. That isn't going to make him a good pro prospect coming off the edge, going up against 6'5" offensive linemen in the NFL. But Mike linebacker, it's a little bit more natural. Like I said, he'll never leave the field.
Yeah. The transition I'm most intrigued about with him is I recall talking to him that first spring when Ryan Walters came in with Kevin Kane and they started developing this defense. One of the things he liked about his rush-in position with that group was he said, you don't have to think too much. You just read and react. And he could use natural athleticism, apparently from being an all-state goalkeeper or whatever it was, to just kind of make a decision based on his athletic skills and what he thinks he's going to see. Now he's the guy with the headset who's trying to get everybody else lined up in the right position. That's a lot of thinking every single play. Clearly he's been entrusted and Purdue staff believes he's capable, or they wouldn't put him in this situation. But that's the one difference, most difference from last year is instead of just reading and reacting and trying to make plays on your athleticism, now you're trying to take care of everybody else's job and make sure they know what they're supposed to do as well.
And I asked him about this at Big Ten Media Day. I think it's a benefit that he is taking this job the first year that headset is available, because it's not something that he has been building towards having that responsibility. It's just this season now he gets it. And, they can't talk to you throughout the game. It's a brief window before the play, and it gets cut off at a certain point in the play clock, but they can at least, feed you a couple things to make sure that you've got your head on straight. And again, this is probably another situation where it's better that they're starting with a team like Indiana State than starting with a Big Ten road game on a Thursday or Friday night or whatever has happened sometimes. It's a game where they can work through some of those things in real time and have their head on straight when they go up against Notre Dame. So the other position in the middle, we guess we're kind of picking 12 starters or 11 and a half, or however you want to say this. Yanni Karlaftis is going to be the starting will linebacker when they use a will linebacker. And I think that Antonio Stevens is going to be the safety linebacker hybrid, strong safety, whatever word you want to use for that, when they need that. And some of that's going to just be matchup dependent, but it really is a defense that more or less has 12 starters. You can only put 11 on the field, and there it's just a matter of what is the other offense showing you? What are you expecting from the other offense? Kind of the difference between, are you playing Ohio State, which is going to have 3 NFL receivers and you need that extra help, or are you playing maybe a traditional Wisconsin look where, or Iowa, where they're going to go double tight. You're going to need a bigger linebacker body, a more conventional linebacker body on the field.
Yeah. You can put 11 on the field, but as we found out last year, you can put 12 on the depth chart. So
you can put as many on the depth chart as you want. There are no rules. It's not a NCAA by law. It's not in the
when
Constitution.
Jeff Brown was the head coach, they put 0 on the depth chart. We just got a blank sheet on that page of the notes. But yeah, last year, the entire season, I don't know, you weren't covering Purdue at the time. There were 12 defensive starters listed every week, with, I think 5 defensive backs. They were all listed, and 2 inside linebackers. So it does fluctuate a little bit. But, I think Antonio Stevens is a guy who came on late last year and did some good things. Yanni Karlaftis is a guy who was waiting, trying to get on the field, got on the field, then you couldn't take him off the field. So, that bodes well just in terms of having that experience last year. And now both of those guys are veterans, are useful in whatever you need to do defensively.
Do they release a depth chart every week? Just Purdue?
Yes, every Monday when the game notes come, page 2 of those notes have a depth chart on them.
Okay, that's good. There's a lot of programs that don't. I actually don't even mind when they don't, because if you're covering that team, then that means you get to kind of add some insight and say, well, this is who we're. But based on what we've seen and the conversations we're having, and this is what the depth chart actually is, regardless of what they're telling you. But I'm glad that they'll put one out too, because maybe that brings some more clarity to things. Let's move to cornerback, where this is another spot where, well, injuries and camp absences have really come into the forefront. So I think if on the opening snap of opening day, I think it would be Nyland Green and Marquise Brown outside, Kendrick Breedlove as the slot, the third nickel, whatever you want to call him.
Yeah.
Do you think that's who it would be, or is somebody else creeping in there on the outside?
No, those are definitely, I believe, the 3 guys who have, when they're all out there, have played those roles. And Nyland Green's going to start just because he's the best player from what we saw early in camp. Outside of probably Thieneman or Jenkins, he's in the top 3 best defensive players that Purdue has. Breedlove is, he didn't come to Purdue to not play. And I'm sure that was I asked specifically about Breedlove this week, and he's not as tall or, long or whatever as some of these other guys, but they're like, man, he's got a lot of the tools that you need. So I think he's going to be in there. Marquise Brown is a guy who was playing well at times last year. Definitely going to be in there. Botros Alessandro has been getting reps, but that's because of injury, and he's a guy who played because of injury last year. One I'm intrigued about is Tarion Grant. I'm not sure how you say his first name, but he's a young guy, and he's been in the mix with some of these first teamers. But if everybody's healthy, which we already know, Nyland Green not playing against Indiana State, so one of these guys, looks like Botros Alessandro, is going to be the guy out there. Those guys are going to be on the field at some point. It's kind of like we were talking about with defensive line. You can't just play every single snap, especially when you face a team that throws a lot. You're going to want to give your guy a rest every once in a while. But Green, Breedlove, and Brown, definitely, if we're doing a depth chart, they would be the guys listed at the top of those positions.
And I know we were talking about on offense, those guys being out and how, whether or not that's going to be important or not. these guys missing on defense is what I think is a bigger concern if it were to linger. We already know that um, Nyland Green will not be around for the season opener. They do expect him back for Notre Dame. I'm pretty sure that's kind of locked in now. Breedlove, it sounds like it's a more temporary thing or a shorter term thing, to the point that they have actually switched around some of our, here's some inside baseball. They've sort of switched around our interview schedule. We were already supposed to talk to the cornerbacks, but they pushed that back in part because I think they expect Breedlove to be back and we want to talk to Breedlove. So they've just kind of shell gamed it a little bit on our interview schedule. But that's maybe just them being optimistic. We don't know if it's actually, we don't know when he'll be back. So those are the guys. If Purdue doesn't start the year with those guys and those other guys you're mentioning, all those other guys you mentioned that have been filling in, I think are good football players, and they'll be able to beat Indiana State with those guys. But when you start talking about what could make the team special, that's what you brought in talents like Nyland Green and Kendrick Breedlove to do. That's why you brought in guys from Georgia who, even if they weren't in mixing into Georgia's future, Georgia is the preseason number one by a lot of people's votes. And it's hard to break into the top of the roster at Georgia. And maybe it will increasingly get harder to break into the top of the roster of the depth chart at Purdue. But right now, they could bring guys in like that and just put them right at the top. And those are the kind of guys who could help transform a defense that was good last year, had well, maybe I shouldn't even say good, was transitional last year, had definitely some star moments, but needed to stabilize kind of at all 11 spots. This is your stability. And if those guys, if those injuries linger beyond, they said Nyland Green had his foot stepped on. It's not going to be surgical, but something that had to be rehabbed and fixed before he could get back on the field. And we have not seen him now in a week. And Breedlove, we haven't seen in a couple days. If those are things that do linger farther into the season than just those first couple weeks, it's whatever happens Notre Dame, I don't know. That's going to be a pretty talented roster. I still look at the Oregon State, Nebraska back-to-back as maybe the two most critical games of the season as far as what the season turns out to be. If you come out of those 4 games and you play up, if the best case scenario is you're 3-1, that's still a pretty good position to be in for the back 8 games of your season. If you come out of that 1-3, I don't know what the upside is for the season. Right. So that's going to be a critical time. If you don't have those guys back for those weeks, maybe that's a difference between whether you're beating those teams who are more talent equated in games that are probably going to be decided in the margins.
Yeah, and if you look at the schedule and you're trying to slot wins and losses, there is, I think we've talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago, there is a path to 6-6, but those first 4 games are crucial in getting to 6-6. And let's be honest, 6-6 for this team this year would be a positive thing. I think that shows you're trending in the right direction. And against this schedule, if you can get 6 wins, that to me tells you that the program is ascending compared to where it was a year or 2 ago. We'll move to free safety, and I don't think that we need to debate this. Dylan Thieneman is the guy, but you mentioned that the defense did some good things last year. Dylan Thieneman did a lot of good things. One statistic he had that, if you're a Purdue fan, you probably hope he doesn't have this year, is 106 tackles, because you don't want the guy lining up 25 yards behind the ball to be making the most tackles on your defense. You hope those guys up front and the linebackers and even the corners making plays on the ball don't allow for Thieneman to have 106 opportunities to make a tackle. And some of those are just natural, speed and talent and being in the right place. But a lot of those too were because if he doesn't make the tackle, then the other team's getting 6 points.
Here's a statistic I didn't know until right before we recorded, because ESPN put out its list of the top 100 players in college football. Dylan Thieneman was number 95 on that list, which I'm sure he thinks is too low, because he's an arrogant guy, but because he's very confident in the work that he's put in. And I'm working on a bigger piece about him too that I believe will be on our sites next week if I can get it done here this weekend. And but there was a stat in there that he was targeted 11 times last season and had 6 interceptions and 2 pass breakups. That's insane. They had some quip in there that that means he was targeted 8 times too many, even though 11 isn't hardly any in a 12-game season. like the most indispensable player on this team. Probably even more so than Hudson Card, maybe in some ways. Maybe not. Maybe Hudson Card is so much better than the other quarterbacks right now that losing him would damage the chances of winning. But man, everything that Thieneman means to this team. You're right. I think six interceptions is hard to replicate. That's a lot of interceptions, and sometimes things just kind of have to go your way. The ball has to bounce the right way, or something happens that you're benefiting from something else. Right time, right place, right time, that sort of thing. The 106 tackles, I believe, has to go down, and it's not because he covers a lot of ground. He's a sideline to sideline player. He has elite speed. He was in the 4.4s in high school, and the way the work that he puts in, something that was coming up when I was talking to former coaches of his about how he was in high school, especially, was that he is where the ball is going to be before anybody else is, or where before most players would be. That he just reads a field. He puts in so much film work that his anticipation is like off the charts. So he's going to be in position to get tackles regardless. But he also, I think, last season cleaned up a lot of mistakes, or was a safety valve for other leaky issues that the Purdue defense had. It needs to cut down on the number of times where he needs to do that. So if that means that he only gets 80 some tackles playing a full season, that is fantastic news for Purdue. I think if you can take 2 or 3 times per game that he doesn't have to bail you out and make a tackle, then that means something good is happening at the front, which means your offense is getting the ball back more, which means you're winning more games. And 6-6 that you mentioned, just to put that in perspective, I don't think they're going to lay down for those 4 games against Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon, but they're going to be heavy underdogs in those games. It would be a big upset to win one of those games. And by the way, that's true of like 120 some teams in college football to beat any. Those teams aren't going to lose games. There might be 5 losses between those 4 teams this season from here till January. So if they go 6-2 in the other games, like if you win whatever that is, 75% of your other games, you're a bowl team. And I think in most seasons, when beating the teams that your talent equated against 75% of the time is not a bad goal for Purdue. So again, we're not making excuses ahead of time for a team to like only go 6-6, but it's got to be the perspective of what this schedule actually is to the expectations that you should have. So I think you're right. I think 6-6, I've been saying all along that this team could be better, and the record might not be better because that's just, you don't have a lot of margin for error when a third of your schedule is 4 top 10 teams. But I think 6-6 is absolutely attainable because I look at some of those other teams, Michigan State, Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Oregon State. Like they shouldn't scare Purdue. Rutgers, like those aren't teams that should scare Purdue. They should have an opportunity to win all 8 of those games. 7, not including Indiana State.
Right. Yeah. And let's be honest, like you're not going to win every single game where you are evenly or close to evenly matched. But you're right. If you win 3/4 of those, that's not something Purdue did last year. I thought Purdue and Nebraska was all talent, was a wash going into that game. And then you think that you're going to Nebraska, so maybe you make Nebraska 2.5 point favorite or whatever because of the home field advantage. And then it's a game briefly, and then Nebraska just, runs Purdue off the field. And that was a situation where I was like, man, this is a game that I thought Purdue could win, and Purdue, just wasn't there. Iowa was a game that was a backup quarterback who, basically was mocked for his size and everything else, and not to take anything away from him because he threw a nice pass to get a touchdown to win the game. But there was a long pass play and a long run in that game by Iowa, and that was the difference. Virginia Tech was the one that I felt like Purdue had to have last year because Ryan Walters had just had his first game against Fresno State, last minute touchdown after taking the lead with about 4 minutes to go. And then you're going on the road against Virginia Tech, and it's like, if you start out 0-2, that's, bad sledding trying to climb uphill, and you win that game. So that was maybe the first inclination that this is going to work with this coaching staff, because I thought that was a tough situation to go to. Virginia Tech, it rained for 10 hours. I ended up getting to my hotel at 3 or 4 in the morning and flying out at 7 o'clock in the morning. Basically a miserable day all around, unless you're a Purdue fan and you got to see
except for the win.
Yeah. But those are the games, that the Virginia Tech type games that you're going to have to win to, not just get to a bowl game or get to 6-6. The people who are giving you money to go out and get Nyland Green and CJ Smith, they need to see a return on their investment. They need to say, oh, okay, I'm donating money to this NIL, and the players you're getting with it are coming in and helping this program get to the next level. And then if you go 6-6, how do you get to 8-4? How do you get to 9-3? You need to keep having something to go to donors with and saying, hey, we're right there, but we really need this. We really need this type of guy, and it's going to cost X number of dollars. That's where we are in college football. And that's why it's so important to keep showing progress, not only, in terms of on the field, which is things that we talk about, but with wins and with the specific players that you're bringing in with the money that people have donated.
We're going to talk more about this next week, because I think next week is going to be sort of a season prediction, maybe go game by game and give what we think, predict Purdue's record for this season. But just this conversation I was having with someone at Purdue yesterday, which is, you look at every season, every schedule is like a bell curve. And you've got at one end, the best end, you've got like the elite of the elites. And at the other end, you have, I'm not going to say that it's not like they're trash, but sometimes they're a step below you. That's where Indiana State would be, right? I don't know if Indiana State is a good FCS program, but it's a level below Purdue. Purdue should have no trouble beating them. But most of your schedule is this messy middle, and it's like palms up in most seasons. Like, are they better than any of those teams? Week to week, it's teams that maybe it's a 50-50 proposition that you beat them or they beat you, and it's a matter of who comes out on top. And that's why having 4 of those teams this year that are down at that elite end just makes it tough, because there's just no margin for error on those 50-50 games for the rest of the schedule if you're trying to get bowl eligible. But I just think that's an important thing to keep bringing up. And there's definitely a course. Nobody around the country is thinking, oh, you guys are wrong about Purdue. They're going to be a 9-3 team. Like, I'm not hearing that, but there's a growing chorus of people who are like, what are you guys talking about? 18th out of 18. Like, this is not the worst team in the Big Ten. Like, there's real talent here. It's a better roster than it was last year. And it's an intriguing season, because I think if everyone stays healthy, there could definitely be some surprises in a positive way for Purdue on this schedule. We've gone kind of long. Like I said, we're going to come back next week, middle of the week probably, and do sort of a season preview podcast. But until then, keep following us on indystar.com, jconline.com, our coverage there, our videos there. It's all over the place. So for Sam King, I'm Nathan Baird. Thanks for watching.